The radio crackled to life at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of forward operating base Blackwater. All stations, this is Overlord. We have multiple aircraft inbound, unknown configuration, bearing 270. All available pilots to ready stations immediately. Captain Vesper Ghost, Nakamura rolled from her cot, muscle memory guiding her hands to combat boots and flight suit before her mind fully processed the urgency. Around her, the pilot quarters erupted in controlled chaos, voices sharp with adrenaline, the metallic symphony of zippers and buckles, boots pounding against corrugated flooring. But something felt different about this scramble. The base commander's voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. Ghost had been flying combat missions for 8 years, had logged over 2,000 hours in everything from crop dusters to F-22 Raptors. She'd earned her call sign not for stealth, but for the way she seemed to vanish whenever the brass wanted to assign desk duty. Her personnel file read like a technical manual: exceptional marks, flawless mission completion rate, 0 disciplinary actions. What it didn't mention was the scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw, or the reason she never talked about her childhood in the mountains of Wyoming. "Ghost, you're flying Viper 7, Major Kowalski barked as she sprinted past the operations tent. "Intelligence suggests these aren't standard insurgent aircraft. We're talking military-grade hardware, unknown origin." She grabbed her helmet and weapon, noting how her hands remained steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Through the hangar doors, she could see her F-16 Fighting Falcon waiting on the tarmac, its angular silhouette stark against the desert dawn. The crew chief, Sergeant Torres, was already completing pre-flight checks with the methodical precision of someone who understood that her life depended on his attention to detail. "Ma'am," Torres called out as she approached, "fuel's topped off, ordnance loaded per combat configuration." But he hesitated, glancing toward the horizon where the first hints of orange were bleeding into the darkness. "Something's got everyone spooked. Radars picking up formations moving in patterns we've never seen before." Ghost climbed into the cockpit, her movements fluid and automatic. As she strapped herself in, she caught her reflection in the canopy glass: focused brown eyes, black hair pulled back in regulation style, the small silver wings pinned to her collar that represented everything she'd fought to achieve. Her father's voice echoed in her memory: "When the moment comes, little hawk, you'll know what to do." The engine roared to life beneath her, 29,000 pounds of thrust waiting for her command. Whatever was coming over that horizon, she would meet it head-on. The morning briefing had been unusually terse. Colonel Martinez stood before the assembled pilots, his weathered face grim as he pointed to aerial photographs projected on the tent's canvas wall. "Satellite imagery from 200 shows a convoy of aircraft approaching from the northwest. Configuration unknown, but they're moving in perfect formation, too perfect for anything we've encountered in this theater." Ghost studied the grainy images, her trained eye picking out details others might miss. The aircraft appeared sleek, angular, with a wingspan suggesting advanced fighter capabilities. But something about their formation nagged at her. It reminded her of hunting patterns she'd observed as a child, when her grandfather would take her tracking through the Absaroka Mountains. "Intel believes we're looking at next-generation stealth fighters," Martinez continued, "possibly prototypes being field-tested by hostile forces. Your mission is reconnaissance and assessment. Do not engage unless fired upon. Repeat, do not engage unless fired upon." Lieutenant Razor Chen raised his hand. "Sir, why aren't we scrambling the full squadron? 6 aircraft versus unknown numbers seems like poor odds." Martinez's jaw tightened. "Because, Lieutenant, those 6 aircraft represent the most experienced pilots on this base. And because," his eyes found Ghost's, "intelligence suggests these intruders might be testing more than just our response time." As the pilots dispersed to their aircraft, Ghost noticed how the conversations died when she passed. It wasn't unusual. She'd grown accustomed to the mixture of respect and curiosity her presence generated. Female fighter pilots were still rare enough to draw attention, especially ones with her combat record. What bothered her was the way Major Kowalski had avoided eye contact during the briefing, and the fact that her specific aircraft assignment had come directly from base command rather than through normal channels. The pre-flight ritual calmed her nerves. Check flight controls, verify weapon systems, test communications. Each step was a meditation, a connection between pilot and machine that transcended mere technical procedure. The F-16 was an extension of her will, responsive to the slightest input, eager to dance through the sky with deadly grace. Blackwater Tower, Viper 7 requesting taxi clearance. She spoke into her helmet microphone. Viper 7 cleared to taxi runway 27. Wind 260 at 12 knots, altimeter 299er2. Good hunting, Ghost. As she guided her aircraft toward the runway, Ghost caught sight of movement on the control tower's observation deck. A figure stood silhouetted against the lightning sky, too distant to make out features but familiar in posture. For a moment, her concentration wavered. It couldn't be him. He was supposed to be dead. The radio crackled with final instructions, pulling her back to the present. Whatever ghosts lurked in her past would have to wait. Takeoff was smooth, the familiar sensation of acceleration pressing her back into the ejection seat as the F-16 clawed its way skyward. Within minutes, she was at 20,000 feet, the desert landscape spreading below like a vast brown canvas dotted with the geometric patterns of military installations. Her radar swept the horizon methodically, searching for the approaching threat. Viper Flight, this is Viper Lead, came Kowalski's voice over the tactical frequency. Maintain radio discipline. Targets bearing 320, range approximately 40 miles and closing. They're not showing up clearly on radar, definitely stealth-equipped. Ghost adjusted her sensor array, pushing the F-16's electronics to their limits. There, faint contacts dancing at the edge of detection, appearing and disappearing like mirages. But her eyes caught something her instruments couldn't, contrails forming impossible geometric patterns against the morning sky. Viper 7 has visual contact, she reported, keeping her voice level despite the adrenaline spike. Count 6 aircraft in modified Delta formation. There, beautiful. And they were. The approaching fighters moved with a fluid grace that defied aerodynamics, their surfaces seeming to bend light in ways that made tracking difficult. But Ghost's grandfather had taught her to hunt not just with her eyes, but with intuition, to feel the prey's intentions before they themselves knew what they would do. The lead aircraft broke formation, diving toward her position with stunning speed. In that instant, Ghost recognized the pilot's strategy. It was a technique she'd been taught years ago in a different context, by a different teacher. A technique that officially didn't exist. Her finger moved toward the weapon selector switch as understanding dawned. This wasn't just a reconnaissance mission. Someone wanted to see what she remembered, and how well she remembered it. The morning sun glinted off her canopy as she prepared to find out exactly who was testing her, and why. The enemy lead's dive was textbook perfect. A vertical attack profile designed to overwhelm defensive systems through sheer speed and surprise. But Ghost had seen this maneuver before, had it drilled into her muscle memory during countless hours of training that officially never happened. Her response was instantaneous and unexpected. Instead of turning to engage or diving for cover, she pulled her F-16 into a climbing barrel roll that brought her directly into the attacker's blind spot. "What the hell?" Razor's voice cracked over the radio. "Ghost, how did you?" "Maintain radio discipline," Kowalski cut him off, but Ghost could hear the confusion in his voice too. The maneuver she just executed wasn't taught at any military flight school. It was something else entirely, something that required understanding not just the mechanics of aerial combat but its philosophy. The enemy pilot's reaction confirmed her suspicions. Instead of pursuing his attack, He pulled up sharply and rejoined his formation, but not before waggling his wings twice. It was a signal, one that made Ghost's blood run cold. Only one person had ever taught her what that particular wing waggle meant. "Viper Flight, this is Viper 7, she transmitted, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm seeing unusual flight characteristics from the lead aircraft. Recommend we maintain distance and observe." The enemy formation had assumed a holding pattern at 30,000 feet, well within missile range but making no aggressive moves. They were waiting for something or someone. Ghost's HUD displayed all 6 contacts clearly now, their stealth capabilities apparently deactivated. It was as if they wanted to be seen, wanted to be studied. Her grandfather's voice whispered through her memory. "Every hunter leaves a signature little hawk. Learn to read the sky like a book, and you'll never be surprised by what flies through it." She thought he was speaking metaphorically about the eagles and hawks they tracked through the mountains. Now she understood he'd been preparing her for something far more significant. The radio squawked with Major Kowalski's voice. "Ghost, you're cleared to move closer for identification. Maintain safe distance but get us some detailed imagery." As she banked toward the mysterious formation, Ghost noticed how the other Vipers hung back, giving her room to operate. It was unusual tactics for a reconnaissance mission. Normally they'd approach as a unit, unless someone had specifically requested that she be the one to make contact. The lead enemy aircraft was unlike anything in current military inventory. Its design suggested advanced materials and propulsion systems decades ahead of known technology, but what caught her attention were the markings, or rather, the absence of them. No national insignia, no squadron identifiers, nothing to indicate origin or purpose. Just pristine metal surfaces that seemed to absorb and reflect light in impossible ways. Her targeting system locked onto the aircraft automatically, and for a moment Ghost's finger hovered over the missile release trigger. Then the enemy pilot did something that changed everything. He began flying in a specific pattern, a figure-8 loop that she recognized immediately. It was the signature of her first flight instructor, a man who'd supposedly died in a training accident 15 years ago. Staff Sergeant Marcus Longshot Reeves had been more than just a flight instructor at the Air Force Academy. He was the one person who'd believed a 19-year-old girl from Wyoming could become one of the military's elite pilots. More importantly, he was the only person who knew about her other training, the skills her grandfather had taught her in the mountains, skills that had nothing to do with flying jets and everything to do with reading the intentions of things that moved through empty spaces. "Impossible," Ghost whispered into her oxygen mask. Longshot had died when his T-38 trainer experienced catastrophic engine failure during a routine training flight. She'd attended his funeral, had seen the flag-draped coffin lowered into Arlington National Cemetery. But the aircraft ahead of her was flying his signature maneuvers with precision that bordered on the supernatural. The formation began to descend, their movement coordinated with an elegance that suggested years of practice together. Ghost maintained her position, her training warring with instinct. Everything about this encounter screamed trap, yet she felt no immediate threat from the mysterious pilots. Instead, she sensed something almost like nostalgia. "Viper 7, report your status," came Kowalski's increasingly tense voice. "Viper 7 maintaining observation position," Ghost replied, watching as the enemy aircraft began to separate, creating a wide circle with her F-16 at the center. No hostile actions detected. They appear to be demonstrating. What they were demonstrating became clear as each aircraft performed a different aerial maneuver, each one a technique Ghost recognized from her unconventional training. Vertical climbs that pushed the envelope of physics, knife-edge passes that required perfect timing and absolute trust in one's aircraft, defensive spirals that could break the lock of any known missile system. It was a language written in contrails and G-forces, a conversation conducted at 600 miles per hour between pilots who understood that the sky was more than just empty space. It was a medium for communication, for art, for expressing things that could never be put into words. And at the center of it all, Ghost began to understand why she'd been chosen for this mission, and what the mysterious pilots were really trying to tell her. The demonstration reached its crescendo as all 6 aircraft performed a synchronized maneuver that defied every principle of formation Flying Ghost had ever learned. They passed through each other's flight paths with millimeters to spare, creating a three-dimensional mandala of metal, an exhaust that painted temporary beauty across the morning sky. When it was over, they resumed their holding pattern and waited. Ghost's hands moved across her controls without conscious thought, her F-16 beginning to respond to intentions she hadn't yet fully formed. Somewhere deep in her muscle memory, skills that had been dormant for years began to awaken. Her grandfather's training merged with Longshot's instruction, creating possibilities she'd never imagined. "Viper 7, what are you doing?" Kowalski's voice carried a note of alarm as Ghost's aircraft began to move in ways that weren't covered in any tactical manual. But Ghost was no longer listening to the radio. She was listening to the sky itself, to the messages written in air pressure and wing flutter, to the conversation that had been waiting 15 years to be completed. Her F-16 began to dance. The aerial ballet that followed would be analyzed by military intelligence for months afterward, but none of the analysts would be able to fully explain what they observed. Ghost's F-16 moved through a series of maneuvers that pushed both pilot and aircraft beyond their theoretical limits, each movement a response to the silent communications emanating from the mysterious formation. She flew with a precision that seemed to violate the laws of physics, her aircraft responding to inputs so subtle they barely registered on flight recorders. The other Viper pilots watched in stunned silence as their colleague performed aerial poetry at near-supersonic speeds, her F-16 leaving contrails that formed temporary calligraphy against the blue canvas of morning sky. The enemy pilots responded in kind, their advanced aircraft flowing around Ghost's position like water around a stone, creating patterns of motion that were simultaneously threatening and beautiful. It was combat without weapons, warfare expressed through pure skill and artistry, a conversation between warriors who spoke the same ancient language of speed and space. All stations, came a new voice over the radio, Colonel Martinez himself. Cease all aggressive maneuvers immediately. I repeat, all pilots return to defensive positions. But Ghost was beyond following orders now. She was remembering things that had been locked away, skills that her grandfather had taught her during long summers in the Wyoming mountains when she was still young enough to believe that humans could learn to fly without machines. He'd been Army Special Forces, a sniper whose legend had been classified so deeply that even his family didn't know the full extent of his service. But he'd taught her to read movement, to anticipate intention, to understand that every living thing left traces of its purpose in the way it moved through space. "Little Hawk," he'd said during one of their tracking expeditions, "someday you'll fly higher than eagles. When that day comes, remember that the sky sees everything. Trust what it tells you." Now, 30,000 feet above the Iraqi desert, Ghost finally understood what he'd meant. The sky was telling her that the pilots in the mysterious aircraft weren't enemies, they were messengers, and the message they carried was written in her own forgotten memories. The lead aircraft began to climb, its movement signaling the end of the demonstration. But before rejoining his formation, the pilot performed one final maneuver, a victory roll followed by the same double wing waggle that had started everything. As he passed Ghost's position, she caught a glimpse of the pilot's helmet through the canopy. Even at that distance, even after 15 years, she recognized the silhouette. Longshot was alive. The revelation hit Ghost with the force of a missile impact, sending shockwaves through everything she thought she knew about her past. As the mysterious aircraft began to withdraw toward the northwest, climbing to altitudes where her F-16 couldn't follow, she found herself faced with questions that had no easy answers. How was Longshot alive? Why had his death been faked? Who were the other pilots, and why did they fly aircraft that officially didn't exist? Most importantly, why had they revealed themselves to her now in this place during what was supposed to be a routine scramble? Viper Flight returned to base immediately, came Martinez's voice, sharp with authority and something that might have been fear. Full debrief in 30 minutes. And Ghost, not a word of what just happened to anyone outside the squadron. The flight back to Blackwater was conducted in radio silence, each pilot alone with their thoughts and questions. Ghost's hands shook slightly as she guided her F-16 through the landing pattern, the after-effects of adrenaline combining with emotional overload to create a cocktail of exhaustion and hyper-awareness. As she taxied toward the hangar, Ghost noticed the unusual amount of activity on the flight line. Black SUVs with tinted windows sat parked near the operations tent, and men in civilian clothes but military bearing stood in small groups, their conversations stopping whenever uniformed personnel approached. Whatever had just happened, it had attracted attention from very high places. Sergeant Torres was waiting by her aircraft, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by barely concealed anxiety. "Ma'am," he said as she climbed down from the cockpit, "there are some folks who want to talk to you, important folks." Ghost pulled off her helmet, running her fingers through sweat-dampened hair as she tried to process the morning's events. The silver wings on her collar caught the desert sunlight, and for a moment she thought about her father's reaction when she'd first earned them. He'd been proud but unsurprised, as if he'd always known she was destined for something beyond the ordinary. "Captain Nakamura." The voice belonged to a tall man in an expensive suit, his bearing unmistakably military despite his civilian clothes. "I'm Agent Morrison, Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to talk." As she followed Morrison toward a waiting SUV, Ghost caught sight of movement on the control tower's observation deck. The same figure she'd noticed during taxi was still there, and as she watched, he raised his hand in what might have been a salute or farewell. The distance was too great to make out features, but something about the gesture sent chills down her spine. Her grandfather had always told her that every hunter eventually became prey. Looking at the black vehicles and serious-faced men waiting for her, Ghost began to understand that her morning's performance had marked her as something valuable and potentially dangerous. The question now was whether she was being recruited or contained. The debriefing room was sterile and windowless, furnished with nothing but a metal table and uncomfortable chairs. Agent Morrison sat across from Ghost, his fingers steepled as he studied her personnel file with the intensity of someone reading scripture. Two other men flanked him, one in army dress uniform with more ribbons than she could count, the other in the kind of nondescript suit that screamed intelligence operative. "Captain Nakamura," Morrison began, his voice carefully neutral, "your performance this morning was remarkable. The maneuvers you executed aren't taught at any military flight school in the world. Where did you learn them?" Ghost kept her expression neutral, years of military discipline overriding her desire to demand answers about Longshot's miraculous resurrection. "I've always been a creative pilot, sir. Sometimes unconventional approaches work better than textbook solutions." The Army officer, his name tag read General Patterson, leaned forward slightly. "Captain, we have radar records and gun camera footage of what happened out there. What you did wasn't creative piloting. It was something else entirely, something that suggests training far beyond anything in your official record." The weight of their attention was oppressive, but Ghost had faced worse. During her deployment in Afghanistan, she'd been shot down behind enemy lines and spent 3 days evading capture in terrain that should have been impossible to navigate alone. She'd survived by trusting instincts her grandfather had taught her, by reading the landscape the way he'd taught her to read animal tracks. The same skills that had somehow translated to aerial combat in ways she was only beginning to understand. "With respect, General," Ghost said carefully, "I'm not sure what you're looking for me to say. I flew my aircraft to the best of my ability in a challenging situation. If my methods were unorthodox, well, the results speak for themselves." Morrison opened another folder, this one marked with classification levels that made Ghost's security clearance look pedestrian. "Tell us about your grandfather, Captain, Marcus Reeves." The name hit her like a physical blow, though she managed to keep her reaction minimal. They knew. Somehow, they knew about the connection between her grandfather and Longshot, about training that had happened in mountain meadows far from any official military installation. "My grandfather was a retired soldier," she said slowly. "He taught me to hunt and track, basic outdoor skills." "Basic outdoor skills," the third man repeated, speaking for the first time. His accent was unplaceable, educated but with undertones that suggested origins far from America's heartland. "Is that what you call precision shooting at ranges that exceed military standards? Navigation through hostile terrain without instruments? The ability to read environmental conditions with accuracy that rivals sophisticated equipment?" Ghost's mind raced. How much did they know? How long had they been watching her? And most importantly, what did they want? "Captain," General Patterson said, his tone softening slightly, "we're not here to interrogate you. We're here to offer you an opportunity. What you demonstrated this morning suggests capabilities that could be extremely valuable to national security. But we need to know the full extent of your training, and we need to know who provided it." The conversation continued for 2 hours, a careful dance of questions and deflections that left Ghost emotionally drained, but with few answers. They knew about her grandfather's classified service record, about training exercises that had never appeared in official documents, about connections between military personnel that spanned decades and crossed service boundaries. What they didn't seem to know was how much she remembered, or whether her skills were fully developed. When they finally released her, Morrison handed her a business card with nothing but a phone number printed on expensive cardstock. "Captain, you have 48 hours to consider our offer. Call this number when you're ready to learn the truth about your family's legacy." As Ghost walked back toward her quarters, the weight of the morning's revelations pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Longshot was alive. Her grandfather's past was more complicated than she'd imagined, and powerful people were taking interest in abilities she didn't fully understand herself. The simple clarity of military life was dissolving, replaced by questions that seemed to multiply with every answer she found. But one thing was certain: her life as an ordinary fighter pilot was over. The officers' quarters felt smaller than usual that evening, the walls closing in as Ghost sat on her narrow cot and stared at Agent Morrison's business card. Outside her window, the desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars so brilliant they seemed artificial, like diamonds scattered on black velvet by some cosmic jeweler. She thought about her grandfather's funeral, how the old man had looked so frail in his dress uniform, metals catching the light as they lowered his casket into Wyoming's hard ground. He died when she was 16, just as she was beginning to understand that the skills he'd taught her were more than rural pastimes. The hunting, the tracking, the uncanny ability to read wind patterns and animal behavior. It had all seemed like grandfather-granddaughter bonding until the morning she'd used those same skills to help park rangers locate a lost hiker in terrain that had defeated professional search teams. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Some things are better shown than explained. A friend." The email contained a single video file, no text, no sender identification. Ghost hesitated for a moment before opening it, half expecting malware or surveillance software. Instead, she found herself looking at grainy footage of a mountain meadow she recognized, the same clearing where her grandfather had taught her to shoot, where he'd shown her how to read the stories written in bent grass and broken twigs. But in the video, her grandfather wasn't alone. A younger man stood beside him, both of them wearing the kind of casual outdoor gear that marked them as hunters or backpackers. It took Ghost several seconds to recognize the younger man as Longshot, not much older than she was now, his face unlined by the stress and responsibility that would later mark his career as a military instructor. "The girl has potential," her grandfather's voice said, the audio quality poor but comprehensible. "She sees patterns most people miss, understands movement and intention in ways that can't be taught." "You sure about this, Marcus?" Longshot's voice was younger, uncertain. "Teaching these skills to a civilian, especially a kid." "She won't be a civilian forever," her grandfather replied with the certainty of someone who saw farther than most. "And when the time comes, she'll need every advantage we can give her. The world's changing, James. The old ways of fighting won't be enough for what's coming." The video cut off abruptly, leaving Ghost staring at a blank screen with tears she hadn't realized were forming. Her grandfather had known. Somehow, he'd known she would end up in military service, had known she would need skills that bridged the gap between ancient hunting techniques and modern warfare. And Longshot had been part of it from the beginning. Another text arrived. "Tomorrow night. Desert Road, mile marker 47. Come alone. There are things you need to understand before you make your choice." Ghost looked at Morrison's business card again, then at her phone displaying the cryptic message. Two different paths stretched ahead of her, both leading into uncertainty but offering radically different destinations. The DIA wanted to recruit her for something that would probably involve disappearing into the black world of classified operations. The mysterious messenger offered answers about her past, but at what cost? She spent the night cleaning her sidearm and reviewing everything she remembered about her grandfather's lessons, preparing for whatever awaited her at mile marker 47. Whatever choice she made tomorrow, she would make it with full knowledge of what she was walking into. The desert road was empty at 2200 hours, nothing but asphalt stretching between distant mountains under a moon so bright it cast shadows. Ghost had told no one about her destination, had even left her phone back at the base to avoid the possibility of tracking. She'd taken her personal vehicle, a 10-year-old pickup truck that looked like a dozen others parked around the base. Mile marker 47 stood beside a dirt access road that disappeared into the darkness beyond her headlights. As she pulled off the asphalt, Ghost's training kicked in automatically, checking sight lines, identifying potential ambush positions, calculating distances to cover. Her grandfather's lessons in situational awareness merged seamlessly with military tactical doctrine, creating a hybrid awareness that felt both familiar and strange. A single figure stood beside a black motorcycle about 100 yards down the dirt road, his silhouette unmistakable even after 15 years. Longshot looked older, his hair gray at the temples and his face marked by lines that spoke of stress and hard decisions. But his posture was the same, the confident stance of someone who had never met a machine he couldn't master or a problem he couldn't solve. "Hello, Vesper," he said as she approached, using her real name instead of her call sign. "You've grown up." "You're supposed to be dead," Ghost replied, her hand resting casually near her sidearm. "I went to your funeral." Longshot smiled, the same easy grin she remembered from her academy days. "Death is just another kind of cover story when you're in my line of work. The question is, are you ready to learn what line of work that actually is?" He led her to a rocky outcropping that provided a natural amphitheater, complete with stone seats weathered smooth by centuries of wind and rain. In the moonlight, the formation looked almost artificial, as if someone had designed it specifically for clandestine meetings. "Your grandfather and I were part of something called the Aurora Project," Longshot began without preamble. "A joint military intelligence initiative designed to identify and develop individuals with enhanced spatial awareness and predictive capabilities, people who could read patterns others missed, who could operate in environments where traditional training wasn't enough." Ghost felt pieces of her personal puzzle beginning to align. The skills he taught me were part of a curriculum developed over decades of research into human potential, Longshot confirmed. Your grandfather was one of our most successful field operatives and one of our most effective trainers. When he identified your natural abilities, the project directors agreed to an experimental approach, early childhood development combined with conventional military training. The implications were staggering. Her entire life, everything she thought had been personal choice and individual achievement, had been guided by invisible hands working toward purposes she'd never suspected. The hunting trips, the flight training, even her military career, all of it had been orchestrated. Why? Ghost asked, the word carrying all her confusion and betrayal. Because the world changed on September 11th, Longshot replied. Traditional military responses weren't adequate for the threats we faced. We needed operators who could think beyond conventional parameters, who could adapt to situations that didn't exist in any training manual. People like you. He gestured toward the horizon, where the lights of distant military installations twinkled like artificial stars. The aircraft you encountered today represent the next phase of the Aurora project. Advanced platforms operated by enhanced personnel, capable of missions that push the boundaries of what's possible. We've been developing them for 15 years, waiting for the right time and the right pilots. Ghost studied Longshot's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Instead, she saw something that might have been pride mixed with regret. And you think I'm one of those pilots? I know you are, he said simply. Your performance today proved it. The question is whether you're willing to leave everything you know behind to become something unprecedented. As if summoned by his words, lights appeared in the sky above them, not the harsh illumination of conventional aircraft, but something softer, more organic. The mysterious fighters from that morning's encounter descended silently, their advanced propulsion systems producing no more noise than a whisper of displaced air. They landed on the desert floor around the rocky outcropping, their pilots emerging like ghosts from their cockpits. Ghost counted 6 figures approaching through the moonlight, each moving with the fluid confidence of someone utterly comfortable in their own skin. As they drew closer, she began to recognize faces, pilots who had supposedly died in training accidents, been killed in combat, or simply disappeared from military records. All of them very much alive, all of them wearing flight suits that bore no national insignia or unit patches. Welcome to Aurora Squadron, Longshot said. We've been waiting for you to join us. The implications of what Longshot was offering crashed over Ghost like a tidal wave. To accept meant abandoning everything she'd built, her military career, her identity, her entire understanding of who she was and what she served. To refuse meant living with the knowledge that she'd turned away from something that might represent the next evolution of human capability. But as she looked at the faces of the Aurora Squadron pilots, Ghost saw something that made the choice easier. These weren't mercenaries or rogue operators driven by greed or ideology. They carried themselves with the quiet dignity of people who had found their true calling, who had transcended the limitations of conventional service to become something larger. In their eyes, she saw the same mixture of professional competence and deeper purpose that had marked her grandfather's approach to life. What exactly would I be giving up? Ghost asked. Everything, Longshot replied honestly. Your identity, your past, your connection to anyone who knew Vesper Nakamura. The world would believe you died in a training accident just like the rest of us. Your family would mourn, your friends would remember you fondly, and your military records would be sealed and classified. One of the other pilots stepped forward, a woman with prematurely gray hair and the kind of scars that spoke of hard-won experience. But you'd also be gaining something that can't be measured in conventional terms, she said. The chance to operate at the absolute limits of human potential, to protect people who will never know your name, to make a difference in ways that matter more than medals or promotions. Ghost looked up at the stars, remembering her grandfather's stories about celestial navigation and the ancient relationship between humans and the sky. He'd always said that some people were born to fly, that the sky called to them in ways that couldn't be ignored. Standing in that desert amphitheater surrounded by legends who had supposedly died for their service, she finally understood what he'd meant. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "Until dawn," Longshot replied. "After that, we disappear and the offer doesn't come again. The Aurora Project is too sensitive to leave loose ends." As the night wore on, each squadron member shared their story, tales of recruitment, training, and missions that sounded like science fiction, but carried the weight of absolute truth. They operated in the spaces between nations, in conflicts that never appeared in newspapers, against threats that governments preferred to handle quietly. Their aircraft were decades ahead of anything in conventional military inventory. Their training incorporated disciplines that bridged technology and intuition in ways that redefined what it meant to be a warrior. But what struck Ghost most profoundly was their sense of family, the bonds that had formed between people who had sacrificed everything for a purpose larger than themselves. They had found in each other what she had always searched for in military service, a true brotherhood of purpose, unencumbered by politics or bureaucracy. As the eastern horizon began to show the first hints of dawn, Ghost made her choice. The transformation began immediately. Within hours of her decision, Ghost found herself aboard a transport aircraft unlike anything in her experience, silent, fast, and capable of flight profiles that seemed to ignore conventional aerodynamics. Her fellow passengers were the Aurora Squadron pilots, each of them now treating her not as a recruit but as a sister-in-arms. The aircraft landed at a facility that officially didn't exist, carved into a mountain range that satellite imagery would show as nothing but barren rock. The base itself was a marvel of concealed engineering, its hangars and training facilities hidden beneath natural-looking geological formations that had been shaped by technologies Ghost couldn't begin to understand. "Welcome to Sanctuary," Longshot said as they disembarked. "For the next 6 months, this will be your home while you complete Aurora training. When you leave here, you'll be capable of things you never imagined possible." The training was unlike anything Ghost had experienced, even at the most elite levels of military instruction. Physical conditioning that pushed her body beyond its theoretical limits, mental exercises that expanded her perceptual awareness, and flight training in aircraft that responded not just to control inputs, but to the pilot's intentions and instincts. Her grandfather's lessons proved invaluable during the early phases of instruction. The tracking skills he'd taught her translated directly to reading enemy movements in three-dimensional space. His emphasis on patience and observation enhanced her ability to process vast amounts of sensory information simultaneously. Most importantly, his philosophy of hunting, understanding prey not just as targets but as complete systems with patterns and vulnerabilities, provided the conceptual framework for everything Aurora Squadron represented. "Your grandfather would be proud," Longshot told her after she successfully completed her first solo flight in an Aurora-class fighter. "He always said you had the potential to be something special." But the training was more than just technical skill development. Ghost found herself studying history that had been classified, learning about conflicts that had shaped the modern world without ever becoming public knowledge. The Aurora Project had been involved in preventing nuclear terrorism, stopping assassination attempts on world leaders, and conducting operations that maintained global stability through precision application of force.